Um, Legislatively, 2020 has been uh, unique. COVID-19 has changed a lot of Capitol Hill's priorities. And as such, we have seen not necessarily a drop off of engagement, but we've certainly seen fewer uh, horse bills moving forward. Oops, I apologize. And so this year's a little anemic as far as an update is concerned, but I will do my best. As far as the wild horse and burro issue is concerned, I don't have any new legislative issues to update you on. Uh, that said, we'll let you know some of the appropriations issues that have come up since we last met in June of 2019. Uh, Going into the fiscal year 2020, the Senate and House debated back and forth, but eventually $21 million was approved, uh, in large part to address the suggestions that were included in the collaborative effort between many animal or horse advocate groups and land advocate groups. $21 million bumped the total budget of the wild horse and burro program within the BLM to over $1 million. And going into next year's appropriations efforts, there will be another additional $1 million increase to take it to $102.6 million budget for that program. Clearly, everybody involved in advocating for the path forward proposal would have liked to have seen more money. Their initial ask was for $50 million. But as all things on Capitol Hill, if you ask for 50, you get 20. And so there was a lot of people were anticipating that figure to come out. We have seen gathers continue during the quarantine, although I'm sure efforts on a whole were slowed down. I don't think they are banking any money that they may have had at their disposal in 2020. I'm sure all of it got spent anyway. So I don't anticipate any huge programmatic changes in the next year, particularly because funding is going to be in short supply. An additional note, there was an approval for, I might get this wrong, but 7 sanctuary facilities in 5 states. And that would account for thousands of animals being moved out of the western states and rangeland corrals that they currently inhabit into permanent facilities, lifelong facilities in other states. The next subject I've got on here is the Horse Transportation Safety Act. This is the double-decker bill. This bill is a contentious issue that we discuss every year. Almost across the board, the horse industry agrees that horses should not be shipped in double-decker trailers. That said, this bill does not provide any exclusion for rodeo horses, and especially horses that are transported in customized double-decker trailers. Those sectors of the horse industry, work very hard on Capitol Hill to try to educate. AVMA reached out to the co-sponsors of the 2019 version of this bill that's still active and invited them out to go look at trailers, and they were that are customized and made safer for horses to travel in, with additional ramps and different ceiling rates and things like that. That invitation was declined. It currently only has 131 co-sponsors. It is still at the subcommittee on highway and transit, and is unlikely to see any new action in the lame duck session going into it. So it will have to be introduced in the 2021 Congress. Next subject is the Preventable Soaring Tactics Act. Since we last met, or since the American Horse Council's last annual meeting, the PAST Act got a name change and did actually pass through the House. Had 330 co-sponsors. It took it into the kind of guaranteed voting schedule and passed without a problem. There is no schedule for the PAST Act to be seen on the floor of the Senate. So unless something changes in the lame duck session, will be forced to be reintroduced in 2021 as well. Final bullet I have on my legislative update for today is Horse Protection Act funding, and the budget going into 2021 will be $2 million for the Horse Protection Act office within animal care at the USDA. There was an increase last year that took it to approximately that figure. And so that is maintaining a figure as opposed to anything. But that is still a good number, a much higher number than it was even 4 years ago. Those are the extent of my updates legislatively. Are there any comments or questions from you all on any of these issues or any other legislative issues you would like an update on?
You have one question in the chat, and the question is there any guidance on how the money for the program is used?
No. As far as restrictions on that budget, it's not. There were within the animal care program, there have been needed technological changes. Staffing concerns have been raised. There is a new, I think, National Academy of Sciences study being done right now about soaring, and the implications of that study will have implications within the animal care office.
That study is complete and
Yep.
has been put out for review, and I believe the reviews are complete. And so I would expect that study to be public in the not too distant future. And I think that I was one of the reviewers, and Dr. Black's on this call, and he was the chair of the committee, the Blue Ribbon Committee. There was some excellent information and recommendations, and so I'm looking forward to seeing it released to the public. Dr.
Yeah, there
Black,
was
do you have any comments on it?
I'll just make a quick comment. This is Jerry Black. We were a little slower getting this finished just because of COVID. We were only able to meet face to face one time, and the rest of it we've done virtually. But I think it's a good report, and we should have it out by no later than the end of the year.
And I apologize to that point. There was a fiscal year 2020 deadline on it, but then coronavirus delayed everything as we all saw. So that when that report comes out, there will be undoubtedly another conversation about all of this and how that funding is utilized in the future, because that budget will probably be a permanent figure for the foreseeable future. Any other questions or comments? And I apologize for not keeping the chat open. Okay. Next subject on our agenda, final subject on our agenda, is I wanted to make the committee and everyone else in attendance aware of a welfare study done in the UK. And they utilize an interesting method in prioritizing welfare concerns across the country. Now, the methodology used, the Delphi process used, prioritizes expert opinions, but the first step in the whole process includes listing welfare concerns that were generated from a larger pool outside of just the expert opinions. And so I apologize, I'll be reading some of this off the screen for the benefit of everyone on the phone, but it's an interesting concept. The last slide on here, so 2 slides from now, there is a chart of all of the welfare issues ranked in order, and I would very much like to hear your all's interpretation of those results, see what similarities or differences we may have, and potentially discuss a similar research project here in the United States. So determining a welfare prioritization for horses using Delphi method specifically functions by determining which equine welfare issues are most important and may need the greatest attention in terms of research effort or owner education. In this case, a Delphi process of eliciting expert opinion was used through a series of surveys and then ranking of issues in those surveys. The University of Edinburgh determined that, in the opinion of equine experts, the most important issues for horses were poor disease prevention, issues arising when older sick horses are not promptly euthanized, lack of owner knowledge of welfare needs of horses, fear and stress involved in horse use, inability of owners to recognize pain behavior, obesity, and inadequate feeding practices. Prioritizing different welfare issues can help to focus attention on the most pressing and severe issues causing the greatest amount of suffering. In this case, in this survey, 2 rounds of anonymous surveys were conducted using an online survey tool. Demographic data was collected from the experts, including age, gender, their field of expertise, including veterinarians versus academic researchers. They also reached out to breeders, owners, and event management staff and facility management staff. And they also collected highest level of education as well. For the first survey, participants were asked to score a list of potential welfare issues derived from an analysis of a severity. In that case, they mean the intensity of suffering likely to be a consequence of the welfare issue, in their opinion. Duration, meaning the estimated time period over which an animal is likely to experience the welfare issue, in their opinion, and the perceived prevalence of that issue, specifically the likely proportion of the UK horse population that they consider to be affected by this specific welfare issue. And again, that would be an opinion. Each issue scored on a 6-point scale for each factor, where 1 was never, 6 was always. They picked an even number scale, which I thought was interesting, so that people couldn't just say kind of or middle of the road. They had to make a decision whether it was likely or not likely, and then base that likely or not likely on a spectrum. Every issue that scored likely, or at least 3 in this case, were included on the second survey as a ranked list, where they ranked them based on the collective figures that were scored. Experts were asked whether they agreed or not, and whether, in their opinion, the issue should be higher or lower. So they weren't asking them to score them again. They were just saying, is this correct, or should this be higher or lower? The agreement between the experts was collected, and they had another conversation assessing the proportion of experts that agreed with each rank position. And then this is the list. And again, I'll read some of these for the benefit of those that are not on a computer. We have 2 different lists here. You have the horse population as a collective from coast to coast, and then individual horses. That's ranking based on the severity of the issue or the duration of that issue. So, for example, the number 1 issue for a national horse population was lack of biosecurity and disease surveillance, as opposed to the number 1 concern for individual horses as being delayed euthanasia decisions. Number 2, nationally, I think feeding off of individual concern was delayed euthanasia decisions, wherein on the number 2 welfare concern for individual horses being lack of recognition of pain behavior. I think of interest in this list is almost all the rest of the welfare issues have to do with feeding and housing care, which in the United States we often attribute to knowledge and education. We talk about large worm loads, heavy parasite infections, obesity, unsuitable diets, hunger follows obesity, which I thought was interesting. Lack of social skills or inability to perform normal social interactions, which are 2 different things, but I think are interpreted in the same way there. Negative affective states, clearly, bad habits, and overworking. Of note, also, they thought the 10th most significant welfare issue to individual horses was overweight riders, which is a topic I do not want to be in charge of discussing and educating with horse owners. But as far as nationally concerned, those same issues translated, lack of understanding of horse welfare needs by an owner or caregiver, fear, stress, frustration from use in work, sport, or entertainment, obesity, again, a very middle of the road concern for all these issues, for all of these groups, inappropriate breeding, indiscriminate breeding, the wrong tack decisions, as opposed to, they say poorly fitting and restrictive tack as opposed to specific tack used. So they don't necessarily talk about pads, chains, anything like that. They're talking about poor saddle fit. And they also mention unstable social groups, unsuitable diets, and poor weaning methods. And so it's a fairly large list. There are clearly some issues that cross over between the national horse population and individual horses in general. But, there's easily 16 different issues on this in this top 10 list. And so Dr. Lenz and I spoke about this, and he thinks that we would have a completely different set of priorities if this study were done in the United States. And I wanted to see what everybody else thought about this. Is this do you see this list translating into the United States? Could this become a working list for this committee to prioritize? Are these things that our equine wealth organizations within the horse industry in the United States need to start paying more attention to? Do you think we're operating in a completely different space? And so we would have to do our own study to get any value at all. I will also note that we do have somebody on the call that is working on a Delphi study in her own country. And so if there are technical questions, I don't want to put Julie on the spot, but we might be able to answer some technical questions about the study itself if anybody has any of those questions as well. I found this study online. I collect random bits of equine research that is done around the world, and this came across my computer one day, and I've been very interested in it, even if it's just as a conversation starter. If it's not of interest to any of you, we can very quickly move on and be done with it. But I open the floor to anybody if you have questions or comments.
I wonder if there's any, this Tom Lenz again, I wonder if any of your organizations have conducted surveys within your organization and prioritized your welfare needs. Has anybody done that? Doesn't look like it.
Keith is
He's got something he wants to talk about here in a bit, once we move on.
No, is AAP. I meant Keith Klein. Is AAP on? Yeah. Okay. I don't want to put you on the spot, Keith Klein, and I apologize for that, but I feel like there was an AAP study.
You want to talk about that, Keith, for us?
So, yeah, we did a survey. Really, it was our Welfare and Public Policy Council, but mostly it was driven for the association and the council to determine activities that we wanted to focus on and, as priorities. So like anything else, some of the things that, were part of our list were placed in the parking lot just due to time and resources that we had. But we're still in the process of working on a lot of those items. Some are successful, some are, legislative issues, and it varies across the board. And some of the issues, just are things that we work on annually and have already been mentioned here.
Thank you, Keith.
Anybody else?
This is Katie Flynn, and I would say that this is more representative of the UK population of horses rather than the United States, because I would not think that in the United States we would see biosecurity as number one, as much as I would love it to be there. I'm
Let's say you're talking
sorry.
yourself out of your job, Katie. I don't know.
No, I have job security because it's never going to get to number one. So I would just say that going to vet school in Scotland, I would say that this is more of a UK centric result.
Yeah, I think that's true. When I saw it, I thought, I don't think that's, the issue we have in this country is that it's such a diverse country geographically. I mean, the folks in Montana have a little different view on things than the folks probably in Southern California, and then our breeds are different. So it would, if we were to dive into doing a large study like that, then you would have to sort it out between, different parts of the country and different disciplines of horses, I would think. But I think it'd be interesting.
I guess my question is there value? Would there be value in this? That something like this would require, because of the size of the United States, to Dr. Lenz's point, and the geographical, I mean, the horse industry in the United States is fragmented anyway, but we also have geographical fragmentations as well. A list like this would be massive, or an effort like this would be a massive undertaking. And I'm not sure if there would be interest in this, but I do get a lot of questions asking, especially about welfare, what are the priorities? And when the conversations get, in an effort to give everybody an honest answer, I always say things like, well, there's this group has these priorities and that group has that priority. And oftentimes the conversation, they're like, oh, well, if there's not an answer, I'll just move on. And so it's one of those things, if we as an industry are not in a position to address these things or utilize a prioritization list like this, then that's the end of the conversation. But this was the first time I'd ever seen something like this undertaken, and it was very interesting to me.
Any other
So-
comments on that?
Can I make a comment? This is Mary Ann again.
Sure.
Since I collected a lot of data for the book, because the last chapter is all on where are we going, economics, ethics, and I found it interesting because seconding Dr. Lane said, depending on whether you're in a rural area or you're in a congested urban area, the welfare issues of horse people were very different. And I'd say generally most horse people that have horses, at least that responded, didn't think there were very many issues outside of the horse industry and our professionals in that. And that's where, oh my gosh, there was so much that dealt with the ethics of welfare. And that is something that this group probably can't deal with, the specific organizations do. But I do think that the land issue in terms of confinement came up a lot of horses, and I think that's an emotional issue too. And in terms of urban areas, a lot of people felt that the horses, one of the biggest thing was feeding, and having the ability to have movement, choice, movement, the fun, forage, and friends kind of philosophy. I heard that repetitively. And in the rural area, it was more about economic loss, not being able to take care and feed the horses properly and having more issues around that. So my sense would be as if the council could maybe not survey, but take this data and put it into a little bit of a package that says, if these are issues, are these issues in your area? In other words, put them into groups of the types of issues.
I mean, it's an interesting idea. And like I said, we're uh, any kind of effort like this would be a big undertaking, and so there'd have to be significant interest amongst the organizations that would uh, be needed to reach out to those horse owners. And so we just think about it. I'm throwing all of these things in front of you just to spark conversation. Inevitably, these conversations sometimes take a few months to ruminate, and so this is definitely something we can come back to later and investigate more thoroughly. That said, if anybody has any interest in this study, I have a copy. I'm happy to share it with you. And like I said, there was a time zone issue, so I was not able to get one of the individuals who actually worked on the study to join today's call, but I do have their contact information. Unfortunately, the person who chaired this study has passed away, but the rest of her team is available and willing to discuss it. They're mostly numbers people, not so much horse people, so take that into account. But I am happy to provide that contact information to anybody that's interested. And that is the end of my presentations. Do we have any new business?
Cliff, Keith, Dane did ask to say a few words if he could.
Okay, Keith, you still around?
Cliff, Julie, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great, thanks very much for the opportunity. Just wanted to update everyone on the status of the rule, the Horse Protection Act rule that USDA had finalized at the end of the Obama administration. I'm sure most of you recall that. I think in the end, it was a long process, a couple of years worth of work, but in the end, I think just about every segment of the horse industry and veterinary community, certainly those that support the PAST Act, also ended up supporting that rule. So the rule was intended to implement several segments of the PAST Act to the extent that the Secretary had the authority to do so. And this included eliminating the use of action devices and stacks and pads and bands on those 3 breeds only that have been victims of soring, spotted saddle horses, the racking horse breed, and Tennessee walking horses. It also abolished the industry self-policing scheme, the horse industry organization scheme, and replaced it with a system of independent third-party inspectors that would be licensed, trained, and overseen by USDA with a preference for veterinarians. Although it had been announced by the Obama administration, the rule was not published in the Federal Register, and the incoming Trump administration withdrew it before it was implemented without any explanation as to why. There's been no action to date to review the rule or seek public comment or even state why it feels the rule is no longer necessary. So in the summer of last year, the Humane Society of the United States, as well as our legislative fund, in consultation with pro bono outside counsel and several of our members, decided to sue the agency. We believe that they were in violation of the Administrative Procedures Act, the Federal Register Act, as well as the Horse Protection Act itself. And the department responded by submitting to the court a motion to dismiss the case on several grounds. They claimed that we didn't have standing to bring the suit. They said that the rule had to be published in the Federal Register in order for it to have taken effect. And almost ridiculously, they said there was no evidence that suggested that the rule would have ended soring, although, just months prior, they said that that was what was needed to end soring. So the DC District Court judge found that we did have standing, and she rejected their government's attempts to dismiss on that ground. She also disagreed with the argument that the rule was not soring. However, she did accept the government's argument that because the rule was not published, it was therefore not final and could be withdrawn by the agency at any time pre-publication. In other words, her assertion is that publication is required in the Federal Register for a rule to become final. In order to find this, however, the judge had to really struggle to distinguish some cases where there was pre-publication enforcement of regulations previously, and that resulted in some internal inconsistencies in the ruling. So we think her ruling was flawed, and we have filed an appeal to the higher court, to the circuit court. We don't know when or if we'll get a response to that, but we feel strongly that we do have standing as determined by the lower court, and that we do have a good case. And we'll certainly keep folks at AHC posted, and you can certainly pass that along to members as information becomes available. Happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate the update. Yeah, and that was something the American Horse Council supported. And we were sad to see it languish for an entire administration. But that's definitely something we'll follow as it moves forward. So thank you for the update, and I apologize for not including your efforts in my updates as well, because that's definitely something I've been following.
No problem at all.
Are there any other comments? Old business, new business? If not, Dr. Lenz, I'd like to go to a closed session if that works for you.
Sure.
So at this time, I thank you all for your participation in today's call and your attendance. We really do appreciate everybody calling in, listening in. But I will ask that everyone who is not on the Equine Welfare Committee for the American Horse Council to please end your call now.